Happy Thursday, everybody. Welcome back to Talking Stuff, the Ohio State recruiting podcast presented by The Podcast. I'm Jeremy Birmingham. On today's show, we're talking about Na'eem Offord and his most recent visit to Auburn, what it could mean for Ohio State, and how Ohio State may be approaching a decision that the Tigers could end up forcing. We're going to talk a little bit about Phillp Bell's commitment and the latest with the number of in-state prospects who visited Ohio State for the Akron game before we take a quick peek at the Western Michigan visitors list and a few names that are popping out to me right now. So thanks for being here. Let's get to it. Ohio State commit Na'eem Offord visited Auburn again over the weekend, spurring further conversation about the strength of his verbal with the Buckeyes. Offord, a five-star cornerback from Birmingham, Alabama, has all the physical tools that you could ask for out of a cornerback. He has length, he has strength, he has size, he has speed. And then he, along with fellow five-star commitment Devin Sanchez, are about as close to a sure thing at the next level as there can be in today's recruiting world. That's why Ohio State recruited Na'eem Offord so aggressively when they started reaching out and really building this relationship about a year ago. That's why Tim Walton and Ohio State, despite knowing that there would be some hiccups probably in his recruitment, decided to push so aggressively for a commitment when Offord and his family visited Columbus at the end of January. When they got that commitment in February, there was no illusion that it was going to be easy. And so here we are now, 7-8 months later. It shouldn't be a surprise that things aren't easy. There have been multiple visits to multiple schools. Alabama received, I think, 3 visits in a 5-day stretch in June, prompting people to worry about the Crimson Tide as the team to beat. Oregon hosted Offord and his family multiple times, including an official visit in June, and he's expected to go back there in October. Now it's the Ducks who everyone worry about. Auburn has hosted him God knows how many times. And so once again, another team, Auburn, becomes the team to beat and the team that everyone's going to be concerned about. And it's worth noting that Auburn and Oregon are certainly aggressive on the NIL front. They are unwilling to be outbid, and that's fine. But Offord's also visited Ohio State multiple times. He's also continued to stay in regular conversation with Tim Walton and the Buckeyes coaching staff. And he and his family have never changed their tune when it comes to what their long-term goal is, which is development and becoming an NFL football player. And Walton and the Buckeyes have still presented a case that they're the best option for that. And that's why the vibe of the recruitment could feel worse, but it doesn't. And Ohio State is going to see Na'eem Offord again on October 5th. That's the plan right now when the Buckeyes host Oregon. And so you go into that thinking, hey, there's no reason to feel bad about this. But it's recruiting in 2024. That leaves us at times, probably at best, feeling confused, and other times feeling dirty. We've heard rumors of upwards of $50,000 an official visit being offered to players like Na'eem Offord and his family just to get out to Eugene or to make a trip to the Plains. That's still illegal, by the way. The NCAA just doesn't seem to care. There's no one to enforce the rules. And public opinion has shifted so much on these matters in the last few years that it doesn't seem to matter that it's against the rules because, well, it shouldn't be, which is ludicrous. I think it should be. I think America believes that there still has to be some rules in place. But when it comes to Ohio State and Na'eem Offord, the relationship, folks, reached its high point in February. Okay, that's when he committed. That happened because of the work that Tim Walton had put in on the field with the current buck of Buckeyes, the current group of Buckeyes, not the current buck of Buckeyes. That'd be weird. He's created a defensive back room and a cornerbacks room that is rivaling the mid-2010 run that Kerry Combs and Urban Meyer had. But he also did it because of his off-the-field concern and care and genuine commitment that he made to Na'eem Offord and his family. Offord did not commit to Ohio State because of NIL opportunities, and so I think it's important that we get that out of the way. But they also knew fully well that when those conversations needed to happen, Ohio State would make darn sure that he and his family were taken care of, because that is a piece of the puzzle in 2024. We can't deny that. We can't look over it. We can't gloss it over. We can't ignore it. It's a part of it. And there's no doubt that Ohio State has proven across the first couple years of NIL that they're going to be as good as anybody else in the country. But that's not the forefront of the conversation. and it will never be the forefront of the conversations for Ohio State. Ohio State is not afraid to spend big money on its roster. Obviously, if you look at the current group of Buckeyes, you know that's true. But nothing has changed in the way Ryan Day wants to build his program. Now, not every program is built the same. Auburn and Oregon are in different parts of their journey. But Ohio State is a well-established national championship contender year in and year out. We have watched as the national media for the last 3 months spent hours upon hours talking about Ohio State and its $20 million roster that Ryan Day has built, even if that's impossible to verify because there are no rules or guidelines or transparency about accounting in NIL, which again makes it very difficult to take this entire world seriously because how can you? But Ohio State's been consistent. The Buckeyes do not believe that spending oodles and oodles of money on high school athletes, even ones as good as Na'eem Offord, is the way to build a long-term, sustainable, and successful program. It's hard to argue with that, but you can see the argument if you're coming from the other side. Because there are situations where Ohio State is going to be more aggressive, and we know that. We can look at the David Sanders recruitment and say to ourselves, well, the Buckeyes were not shy there. They were willing to go toe-to-toe with Tennessee. But it didn't matter because they didn't win the battle anyway. So offering more money probably wasn't going to help. But the goal isn't to spend millions of dollars on high school athletes who've not put on a helmet in college. We know it's necessary at times because talent trumps everything. But there's no evidence right now to suggest that paying top dollar for every high school athlete across the country leads to on-field recruiting success. Is there? If we go back to, Texas A&M in 2022 is sort of the famous one that everyone wants to point to. But anecdotally, and that is an anecdote, it seems like the opposite is true. Spending all that money leads to chaos. And anecdotes, however, are not going to carry the day. People are going to look at this Na'eem Offord recruitment and say, hey, Ohio State should get the best of the best. And they should, because talent wins championships, not anecdotes. Ohio State's roster is as good as anyone in the country, but it's not gotten there because of the Buckeyes 2023 recruiting class or 2024 recruiting class, the classes that were really impacted by NIL. No, it was impacted by the class of 2021. That's what this roster is built on the backs of. That class, Ohio State, was number 2 class in the country. But it also signed and had most of its players on campus 6 months before NIL became legal. Retaining the stars from that class and adding a few big-time players like Quinshon Judkins or Will Howard, obviously, is what's put Ohio State in the position that it is in now. Obviously, there are outliers, again, like Jeremiah Smith, who maybe changed the entire conversation, but he's a one-off. He's not a plan. He's not the standard Ohio State's trying to reach. What Ohio State's trying to do is make sure that the players it recruits know that NIL is going to be something that you will do very well in Columbus. But if it's the biggest and most important part of the conversation, and it has to be for schools like Auburn who are trying to upend Ohio State, and that's an important thing. They have to lead with that right now. Ohio State doesn't. Those conversations were not the NIL was not part of the conversations with Emeka Ibuka or JT Tuimoloau or Donovan Jackson or Kyle McCord or Jordan Hancock or Marvin Harrison or anybody else in that class of 2021 that this class is built on. Imagine how expensive this roster would be if Ohio State had to pay all those players 4 years ago and give them the big money deals that everyone assumes they have now. That would be crazy. And Ohio State knows that that is not a way to long-term success. The players Ohio State recruits generally know that that's not the way to long-term success. But it is also hard to tell a player or his family when someone offers X amount of dollars, and by X, I mean insert number here, but I also mean obscene. When someone offers that sort of money, it's hard to ignore it, and you can understand it. So Ohio State has to present things in a different way. Ohio State has to approach things in a different way. Ohio State has to say, we are going to make sure you're very well taken care of. And make no mistake, the Ohio State football players are very well taken care of. But if you are building a roster from high school in, as opposed to college out at this point, I think it's a mistake. And I think Ohio State believes that it's a mistake too. So you have to find a way to balance the best of the best in high school football with the best of the best in college football. You have to balance development with recruiting. You have to be able to balance long-term money and NFL contracts with short-term money and NIL opportunities. Not many people in the country are better positioned to do that than Ohio State, but it may not matter in every instance because not every player is looking for the same thing. So that's what it's about when it comes to Na'eem Offord. He committed to Ohio State in February, knowing full well the Buckeyes were not and were never going to be the highest bidder for his services. The Buckeyes were well aware at that time that someone, eventually, probably like Auburn, was going to make Offord and his family an offer that changed the conversation. And that seems to be happening. Auburn is in a unique position. Alabama is not exactly as well liked in the state as they were, and that could change quickly. So Auburn has to take advantage of things. They're being extremely aggressive to try to build a national championship competing roster and do so in an expanded SEC, and they're trying to do it quickly. We've seen this over the last 2 years with Auburn. They've got a lot of money, and they're not afraid to spend it, and that's the way it should be. But there's an old adage in sports and in the world that everything happens slowly, then all at once. And the recruitment of Na'eem Offord is a good example of that, especially when it comes to Auburn, because this idea that it's just popped up out of the blue or Auburn is not building a real relationship there is probably false. He's been there 1,000 times. He's a player who will be there more often this season as well. If Hugh Freeze keeps winning, the drumbeats are going to get louder and louder about a potential flip, and then Ohio State's going to have to make some decisions. But I know what Ohio State is not going to do. Ohio State is not going to panic because that's not what Ohio State does. The Buckeyes 2025 recruiting class is the number one class in the country. It has more five-star players committed to it than any other school at this point. And to be honest, it's sort of a miracle that there's no drama around anybody else. And I'm not even using the term drama here in a negative light for Offord. He's not doing it. It's hard to turn it down. Ohio State focuses so much on the type of player they're getting. And by that, I mean the type of person they are and the type of player they are and their family, that they trust that the people they recruit come into the system having the proper priorities and perspectives. If a huge money's on the offer, if a huge money offer is on the table for Na'eem Offord, of course, Ohio State and he and his family will have a conversation, and everyone will have to decide what's best for their future, Offord and the Buckeyes. And the truth is, it sort of sucks. We have to think about college football this way now. But here's the question, folks. In the year 2025, is Davis Enigbenosin more valuable for Ohio State than Na'eem Offord? That's pretty important to consider because I think that's the conversation in a lot of ways that people are going to be having. And it's especially important to consider because if Davis Enigbenosin returns to Ohio State and if he's more important than an incoming freshman and he gets a new NIL deal to mirror that importance, guess what? Jermaine Matthews and Aaron Scott and every other player on the Ohio State roster has to get one too. And that's really the calculus that has to be done at this point. It's not about one player at a time. It's not about what does Na'eem Offord need. It's about how does Na'eem Offord's situation impact the other 85 players. The fact is, right now, the residual value for Offord for Auburn is absolutely higher than it is for Ohio State. And they need to win the battle for an in-state five-star prospect that can come in and be the face of the program and help put them back on the college football map where the Tigers think they believe. If Auburn flips Offord and he comes in and helps win some games and creates the narrative for in-state players that Auburn is the place to go, not Alabama, then he's well worth whatever the Tigers want to pay for him. It's hard to argue that because right now it seems like none of this money is real anyway. And again, no one cares how much they spend. But for the Buckeyes, if they match whatever Auburn eventually offers, Na'eem Offord's still coming into the program with Devin Sanchez, and he'll still likely have to be waiting to play behind Davis Enigbenosin, Jermaine Matthews, Aaron Scott, and others. And there's no guarantee that he won't dip back to Auburn 1 year after picking up what would eventually be a pretty healthy paycheck anyway. That's a risk that Ohio State and every other team in the country is having to face. Until there are rules, contracts, and guarantees that a player must stay 2 or 3 years as a part of an NIL deal, there's going to be renegotiations every single year for Ohio State stars and Ohio State's backups, especially for the players that are not from the traditional Big Ten footprint. Those players make a big decision to come to Columbus, and everybody that they know is making back channel deals trying to bring them home. And how is that tenable? How is that tenable for Ohio State? How is it sustainable for college football? At what point do the powers that be have to draw a line? The answer unfortunately, is that there is no easy answer. And it's not going to be the same for every single prospect, and will be a case-by-case, year-by-year conversation. But in this instance, with Na'eem Offord, who's a sure thing at cornerback and will be a star at the college level, the opportunities are going to be great no matter where he goes. And Ohio State is going to make sure he's well compensated no matter how much money Auburn or other places throw at him. It's all subjective. It's all a matter of what matters to you. The Buckeyes haven't changed. The opportunities that they haven't changed, and Na'eem Offord knows that. The Buckeyes have a very clear vision for Offord and every one of their recruits. And again, the important thing to know is that the Offord family knows Ohio State is going to take excellent care of them from an NIL standpoint. Will that be enough? I don't know. He's going to make a lot of money at Ohio State, and the city of Columbus will take care of him for life if he sticks to his word, and everyone around him knows that. Tim Walton and the Buckeyes are counting on that to win the day and for Offord to be a future leader in the Ohio State secondary. But no matter what happens in this recruitment, one thing is certain. Ohio State is better positioned than nearly anyone in the country. But recruiting out-of-state five-star talents is never going to be as easy as it used to be, even for the biggest of the big dogs. The Buckeyes are going to have to figure out what matters to them. Na'eem Offord is going to have to figure out what matters to him, and we'll see what happens from there. Oh, and if you want to help mitigate these losses, donate to the NIL stuff that Ohio State has going on. Check out the foundation, head to the 1870 Society, and help out because you can. Let's get to the rest of the talking stuff. Andrew Ellis joins us now. Andrew, obviously the Na'eem Offord news, if we call it news, isn't good, but the fact that he's done all of this exploring with the consent of the Ohio State staff, with the tacit approval of Tim Walton and the Buckeyes, like, it does make it feel a little bit better, even if he ultimately flips to Auburn, which again I think is the team that's really the one to watch here more so than Oregon or Alabama or anybody else. I think this is the way you at least would want it to go, right? Like, it doesn't feel dirty. It sort of feels just like here's the situation.
Yeah, that's exactly how I feel as the fan following this saga. I guess I feel good for a couple of reasons. Not good, but my concern level is not at a 10 because of a few reasons. One, just being the relationship with Tim Walton, as you alluded to. The fact that he is letting Ohio State know about all these trips. He's not just secretly going out there and going to Auburn or Oregon or Alabama. So I would take that as a positive. But I think maybe the biggest thing that you mentioned was the back and forth between schools that we the fan, view as the biggest threat. Like whether it's Oregon or whether it's Alabama when he visited there half a dozen times in a week, or now that it's Auburn. It just kind of is bringing me back to the Jeremiah Smith recruitment, how it went from Miami to Florida State. And ultimately, I think Miami was probably the biggest threat there. This isn't the exact same recruitment, but I think a lot of times when there are numerous teams vying for that top contender slot, I think that should make you feel a little bit better as the school that he's committed to. Would you maybe agree with that?
Yeah, I do. And I mean, I think the biggest difference in this recruitment versus the Jeremiah Smith recruitment a year ago is that in the case of Jeremiah Smith, there wasn't like Decore and Moore committed to Ohio State next to Jeremiah Smith that they were worried about, obviously you had Mylan Graham, and I guess maybe you could look at it that way. Mylan Graham was a 5-star, wide receiver prospect, according to a handful of the national recruiting sites. So maybe it's more similar than I would have initially thought. But to me, the biggest reason to feel any sort of optimism still is that I know from just having a brain, the Auburn approach right now is one that I think is based almost solely out of desperation for relevancy inside of not just the SEC, but also inside of the state of Alabama. So like they are going to do whatever they can. And sometimes that's scary to think about, but it's also a realization that desperation is a stinky cologne. And I think that people can understand that what you're selling may not really be real life. And Auburn is going to be an improving program, and that's not to knock the Tigers, but that's a team that may very well still lose 4 or 5 games this year. And if that happens, I think it becomes harder to sell the vision that they're trying to sell to Na'eem Offord and his family. And that vision is important to him. The NIL stuff is going to be a part of this conversation because it's a part of the conversation for any 5-star. But Na'eem Offord wants to win championships. He wants to be developed for the NFL. And that's what Ohio State sold him on a year ago. That's what the relationship with Ohio State has been based upon. And Auburn right now, I think, can sell that concept, but will they be able to sell it in reality? If they're not able to do that over these next 2 months, then I'm not sure that they will be able to sway him, even with a huge monetary offer, which I would assume that they're going to make, because that's what they have to do.
Yeah, I'm with you. And I mean, like you said, who knows how many games they lose this year? I'm not terribly familiar with that roster, to be completely honest. But a couple other things that you kind of mentioned that I think people need to remember when we talk about NIL and recruits and NIL and promises and foundations. I think a lot of times people, myself included, forget about the current guys on the team that are also, in the NIL world and getting paid and stuff like that. So I'm glad you brought that up, because I think the people that follow recruiting, and again, I'm guilty of it too, you just kind of forget about those guys that are already on the team and how they have to be compensated too for what they're doing. So you got to keep that in mind too if you're a fan, I guess.
Yeah, to me, that's the most important part of the conversation, but it's also one other part in that, and I'm going to throw you under the bus here, because when we started having this talk about Na'eem Offord, between you and I got like this hair in my eye there. Got it. It was, you said, why don't they just take the money that they had for David Sanders and give it to Na'eem Offord? Which in theory makes a lot of sense, but it's something I'm pretty sure I've said it here before. It's not like there's a giant pile of money sitting on a table that they had earmarked and put in a baggie that said, this is for David. Like, it's, hey, this is what we're going to be able to put together for you. We'll have it for you come February, or we'll have it for you throughout your time. Because you have to go out to the donors, you have to go out to the boosters and say, this is what we need for this player. This is who's going to be here. And if the boosters and donors and those people don't believe the hype or don't buy into that player at the level they need to, they may not be willing to give you the same amount of money. So it's not a situation where there's a vault sitting inside of the Woody Hayes Athletic Center where you just have stacks and stacks of cash. Like, it is money's fungible, but it's not fungible if you don't have it physically to give out. So anyway.
Yeah. And I did say that to you, but I was not being 100% serious. I was just speaking as in, maybe you have a little extra. I'm not going to
100% throw you under the bus then. I'm going to throw you under the bus like 40%. Because I'm sure that is a thought other people have had. So it's a good one to have. But hopefully we can shed some clarity on it. Anyway, there's going to be a lot of wiggles back and forth here in the Na'eem Offord recruitment. The most important thing for Ohio State right now is that he gets to campus on October 5th, like he's planning to do for the Iowa game. Like, that's priority one. If something happens between now and then where he decides, hey, I'm not going to make that trip, but then he still ends up visiting Auburn another time and heads out to Oregon on October 12th, but skips Ohio State, that to me is a red flag, and we can reassess then. But until then, everything that's been said and done by Offord and his family is on the up and up, and Ohio State is having every opportunity to handle the conversations with them like professionals, because that's what they are now, because there's no such thing as amateur football when it comes to college ball. So that's the Na'eem Offord conversation. Hopefully people are okay with the presentation of that. We're going to try something a little different. And every week on Talking Stuff, I'd like to maybe deep dive a little bit more into one specific topic to start the show and then get Andrew's thoughts. We did talk last week about Phillp Bell and his potential commitment to Ohio State. That happened on Saturday night about 10:45 Eastern time. As I was in the car on my way home from Columbus, Phillp Bell on a yacht outside of California on the ocean somewhere said, yes, he's going to the Ohio State University. Maybe not a very well kept secret, as we said last week. The USC folks sort of let the cat out of the bag, but for Brian Hartline's class, I think that you're going to start to see the national rankings of the Ohio State recruiting class at wide receiver start to go up. And this is going to end up looking like a pretty good group when it's all said and done. But what did you think of, if you got a chance to look a little bit closer at Phillp Bell's tape, Andrew, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I like the addition. I do. I mentioned this last week that if this is not your A+ wide receiver class, if this is more of your B wide receiver class, then you're doing pretty well at the position. I'm a fan of it. Seems like a guy who can play anywhere, not some 4-3 guy, at least not from what I could see on tape, but he's got good hands. He's versatile. I'm a fan of the addition. I am. I like it. I like where the class is at wide receiver. I'm excited to see what the next few years look like. Have you ever been on a yacht by chance?
Nope.
No.
I mean, I've been on a cruise ship. That's about the biggest boat. That's the only type of boat I've been on that was more than just like a little dinghy or a speedboat.
A dinghy. Wow. I've never been on one either. But anyway, I didn't get a chance to actually watch the live commitment video because I was, doing other things on a weekend night, I guess. But I like the addition. I have no idea if he's going to be the final piece to the class or if something else ends up happening. But I'm perfectly content with where the class is right now, even if this is how things end up.
Yeah, I to spin off of that, last week I threw some water on the Anthony Turbo Rogers recruitment and Ohio State's chances to flip him. I'm going to just officially douse the Jerome Miles conversation right now. I don't think that's going to happen for Ohio State. The Buckeyes are able to be out on the road evaluating players this week. I don't know that there's a plan for Brian Hartline to go see him in person. And if there's no plan to see him in person, especially with an off week coming up for Ohio State, then I would say that that's probably a pretty good sign that the Buckeyes are content with what they have at wide receiver. It looks like Miles might be starting to go down the road of a bidding war a little bit, or trying to at least drive up his value by, I think I saw a Texas A&M visit coming up. I've heard Georgia and other schools all now being in the mix. If Ohio State's going to add another wide receiver, I'm going to just predict it'll be Preston Bowman, the Kentucky commitment from Pickerington North, who, as we've talked about a number of times, could fit a number of roles for Ohio State as the sort of slot receiver, third down back, the Swiss Army knife type that they're looking for. Not saying that's a done deal. Not saying it's going to be an easy flip because Kentucky has had a really good relationship with Preston for a long time, but that kid loves Ohio State, and it would be a surprise to me if he at least doesn't visit. And if he visits, then I think he'll commit to Ohio State, because I don't think Ohio State would ask him to take an official visit if they didn't think he would commit. So, Phillp Bell, 6'1", 6'2", depending on where you check, about 185, 190 pounds. As Andrew said, he's not a burner. He's like but he's extremely efficient with his movements. He's a very good route runner and pass catcher. He calls himself like a route runner. That's the type of receiver he wants to be. And I'm not making comparisons to anybody, but like when Marvin Harrison got recruited, the idea was that he was a tactician and a technical route runner, and he'd figure out the rest. And now maybe people underestimated Marv quite a bit in his athletic profile. I'm not sure if that's the case here with Phillp, because people have watched him for 3+ years. But the dude can play football, and the Buckeyes got a good one out of Phillp Bell from Mission Viejo in California. The Buckeyes are hoping to get a good one in Jahkeem Thanos Stewart, who announced earlier this week, as you see on the screen, September 1st, he said he has 2 big announcements coming this week. Andrew, I would like to just get your thoughts. What do you think those are?
I mean, I think he's just going to have one announcement and he's going to commit to Ohio State. No, I'm just kidding. I would venture to guess that I initially thought he was going to announce he's reclassifying, but I think a lot of times when that happens, it's more of like an October, November thing, just because getting the credits in. But I'm still going to say that's going to be one of his announcements, officially reclassifying. And then I feel the other one will be either a top 4 list or maybe an official visit itinerary for the fall. I don't know. That's just my hunch.
Yeah, I hope. I mean, if you look at the rest of Jahkeem's Twitter account following that tweet that's on the screen, it is just like a deluge of USC Trojan propaganda, essentially. So yep. I'm not going to predict that the second announcement is a USC commitment along with a reclassification announcement, but I guess anything's possible. We've seen USC pluck random commitments before from the Southeast. So Ohio State feels like they have a real good shot to land Jahkeem Stewart. He's going to visit on November 30th for the Michigan game. He's going to make an announcement, I would assume, a couple days later when he signs somewhere in the early signing period, because he's absolutely going to reclassify at some point. So I don't know what other announcement it could be other than what Andrew said, maybe a top 4. The only other thought I have, and this is maybe just pulled from other players that had to reclassify in previous years, is that they may had, like Tate Martell, for example, when he announced he was early enrolling, he had to transfer high schools. So he didn't finish his career at Bishop Gorman, even though that's where he finished his high school season. He ended up spending the last 2 weeks at a different high school in Las Vegas so that he could enroll early. So I would either assume that the second announcement is that he's not just reclassifying, but planning to enroll early somewhere, or that he is going to be maybe transferring schools in order to enroll early next year. Or, does that make sense?
Yeah. Transferring schools, like possibly getting him out of the Bayou. If he were to go to like IMG or something, that wouldn't be the worst thing if you're in Ohio State.
I mean, that's probably a fair way to look at it. Again, that's total speculation on my part. Right. I'm not, but I don't know what else that announcement could be. Unless he signed like a major NIL deal somewhere or something, which is also possible in the world we live in. I don't know exactly what the NIL rules are in Louisiana for high school students, but when you go out and say, hey, I've got 2 big announcements, anything's possible, right?
Yeah, it is. And real quick, you mentioned how USC has gotten some big time commitments from the Southeast, and usually those commitments end up signing with Georgia. I think that if USC's defense, granted it was just one game against LSU, if USC's defense like shows that sign of life for the next couple of months, like they're kind of a sleeping giant. I don't know. They're not sleeping, but they're not like on Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State's recruiting level. I think that's kind of a concerning thought. Would you agree? If they get things turned around defensively and kind of where that's going to go for them?
Oh, 100%. I mean, USC is a monster program waiting for a coach that cared about defense. And if they finally have a defensive coordinator or a defensive scheme that works, then yeah, that's going to be a challenge. I think it's fine. It's good for the Big Ten. It's good for everyone when the Big Ten is going to be dominant. So I think that helps. I've said over and over in the last few years, Ohio State has lost many recruits because people believe that they have to play in the SEC if they want to be developed. So the more great teams that exist in the Big Ten, the more Ohio State's going to get great players. And I think that that's fine. I mean, does that mean they may lose more games? Sure. But in the expanded playoff era, who cares? As long as you're getting to the playoffs, you're going to have a shot. So most years, Ohio State's going to get to the playoffs. So they're going to get to the playoff most years because they have really good players in the state of Ohio, and more of them every year. It seems like there's been a resurgence in the Buckeye State. Ohio State offered 14 players in the state of Ohio in the class of 2025 and already have offered 9 in the class of 2026. Of those 9, we had 4 of them on campus with Ohio State last weekend. That would be wide receiver Jaden Ricketts from Watkins Memorial in Pataskala, Victor Singleton from Toledo Central Catholic, Albert Hill from Archbishop Hoban in Akron, and then Jacob Weatherspoon from Avon, the corners there, the last 3 guys. I think it's interesting. Like, we're not talking about it at all, but it's September the 5th, and Ohio State has 1 commitment in the class of 2026. Like, that seems strange to me, and I maybe it's anecdotal. Maybe I'm just being a guy or whatever, but I haven't done the research to see how many Ohio State normally has at this time in the last 20 years, but that seems to me like a low number. And I think that the Buckeyes, getting all those guys on campus last week, you're going to start to see maybe a little bit more aggression from the Buckeyes and trying to figure out, hey, we need to get some class leaders started here. Let's get some dudes to make some decisions. And I think that maybe starts sometime soon. I talked to Albert Hill this week, and he said that him and his family have been sitting down and trying to figure out, like, when's the best time to make a decision, or, how valuable is it to be a class leader, et cetera. And then he said, I'll probably still take officials and wait till next spring. So it's like, oh, okay, well, geez, that's a long time. I don't know what more Ohio State wants or could show these kids that like Albert Hill, who's been on campus like 15 times. But in this new world of recruiting, and we say that all the time, I get it, but like it is a new world until it's old. It'll be, when does it get old? I don't know, probably like another year, but I like to keep prefacing it by saying in the new world of recruiting, an Ohio kid can visit Ohio State like 15 times and have an offer for 2+ years, but still want to play the game in recruiting because you get stuff, like why would you not? Why would you not keep doing it? But from the Buckeyes perspective, like it would be really helpful if guys like Jacob Weatherspoon and Albert Hill and Jaden Ricketts and Storm Miller, like if these guys decided, hey, I'm ready to go.
Yeah. And now that you mentioned that, them only having one commitment, early September, I do kind of wonder, and maybe somebody can do the research, like what that number typically is. It does seem a little bit low. I would love personally, and I think any fan of Ohio State would say this, love for some of those in-state offensive linemen to hop on board, preferably anybody who can play tackle, specifically left tackle. That would be great. I think, and this is just me, hypothesizing, it seems maybe more realistic for one of those corners or maybe a kid like Jaden Ricketts to come off the board sooner than the offensive lineman. I don't know. I'm just kind of spitballing here, but I did watch some Jaden Ricketts tape last week. That kid is really freaking fast. So, and I think his track times would verify that too. So I'm a fan of his, and it's not easy being a wide receiver and getting a Brian Hartline offer. He's an in-state kid, so they definitely want him. I'm kind of watching that one, but I'm also watching the corners, and I would love to say I'm watching the offensive line, but I don't know if anything's getting close there.
The simple reality is for a kid like Jaden Ricketts, so again, he's pretty fast. Ohio State wouldn't have offered him when they did if that wasn't the case. Brian Hartline's offered, I think, 14 receivers in the class of 2026. He obviously has one committed in Chris Henry Jr. We watched this past weekend as he offered another Donovan Murph from South Carolina. We had Jaden Dixon Wyatt in town. Like there's some big name guys out there. And if I was Jaden Ricketts, I would not play around with my spot in the class. Like that's what it comes down to me. Like Ohio State is recruiting him hard. They want him in the class, but Brian Hartline is not the type of coach who's going to turn down other kids that he's offered, waiting for someone to commit, unless that player is like Jeremiah Smith. So as we saw this year when he took Desi Jones while he was waiting for DeCorian Moore and Vernell Brown and et cetera. Like he's not afraid to say, yes, that's my guy. So if you're Jaden Ricketts, you're in state. The simple reality of things for Jaden, who is he's like a top 85 ranked receiver in the country. Like he's not someone that other people are coming after aggressively. If he went out next spring and camped and did a big tour and went on the circuit, he'd end up collecting some offers because people haven't seen him because he's at Watkins Memorial in Pataskala, Ohio, and he hasn't really gone out and do that stuff. And he's 5'10" and 175 pounds, but he can run like the wind. If he went out and did the tours, you're going to see offers come. But based on the fact that Ohio State offered him when they did, the other schools, no matter how good his high school tape is going to be, and it's pretty good, other schools are not going to offer him because the Buckeyes have offered. He's from Ohio. Why waste your time? So it's unfortunate for him, but I think he's in a position where, like Jaden, everyone kind of knows how this is going. Other coaches around the country can read the tea leaves, and so there's not a lot of value, I don't think, for him in waiting. Now, that's slightly different than for a guy like Albert Hill, who, like I said, has been to Ohio State 15 plus times, but he's already been out to Oregon. He spent time down in Florida. He's gone to like all the schools around the country. He's had a chance to communicate to people what he's looking for and to express that, hey, I'd be open to going somewhere else if A, B, and C happened. I don't think Jaden Ricketts is going to get that chance. And so for me, like, if you're looking at a guy who could maybe be like commitment number 2 in that class, it's probably Ricketts. But I also think that Jacob Weatherspoon is very much in that conversation, the corner from Avon. And as you said, though, like the Buckeyes need offensive linemen to get on board. This weekend is the Buckeyes host Western Michigan. Max Riley up at Avon Lake. He's not making a visit anywhere this weekend. I'm surprised, frankly, that he wouldn't be at Ohio State just because he could be. for a night game in the Horseshoe and all of the things that. But it seems like all these kids in the state are just content waiting, and that is a major change from the way things used to be.
Yeah, it is. So let me ask you real quick though, with Ricketts, he's obviously camped, I assume, numerous times dating back to the summer of 2023. Have you like been there for the camps when he's been there and like seen him live and everything? I assume yes, or okay. Yeah. So we've talked on occasion about Jameer Brown, who's 2027 kid, another speedy kid who's still got work to do with his hands, I think. What kind of impression did you get from Ricketts as far as just the hands? And he has the offer from Heartline, so I don't even know why I'm asking you. I guess I'm just curious as somebody who was there watching.
No, Jaden Ricketts is a much more well-rounded receiver right now than a guy like Jameer Brown is. Probably the most well-rounded receiver in the state, in my opinion. Right up there with Sean Terry from Ironton, who's committed to Missouri in the class of 2025. Like I think Ricketts is going to be really, really good. I don't know, like if I could, I don't want to say comparisons like this because I realize what I'm saying, but like to me, the comparison for Jaden, especially once he gets into the Ohio State weight program, is like Terry Glenn, like that type of receiver.
Wow.
Like he's a little bit taller. Terry was only 5'11". Jaden is, listed at 6 foot. So I think he's a similar type of guy. And again, the national rankings on him are not going to be caught up where they need to be because he's 6 foot. He's at Pataskala Watkins Memorial. And he hasn't gone out and done all the stuff, doesn't do the 7-on-7, all that stuff. But I think he's really, really good. And so if he ends up pulling the trigger anytime soon, like Ohio State should be thrilled about that. So, and I know for a fact that Ohio State's feeling on it is like, let's go. Why wait? What are you waiting for? So we'll see if he continues to wait. Speaking of Victor Singleton, the Toledo Central Catholic corner, I did see him last week at Toledo at home against Toledo Whitmer and Carter Lowe. Man, I'm going to tell you, Victor Singleton has a lot that he can do to get better because he's a high school junior and he's 6 foot and 160 pounds or whatever, soaking wet. But I don't know that I've seen a more natural like cover corner in Ohio since Denzel Ward. So if we're talking about like really big names to compare a kid to, there is something really special about Vic Singleton in coverage. That dude is locked down. I don't know what his exact timeline is on making any decisions, but he's another one I expect to probably go into the spring. But people should not sleep on how good that kid can be just because he doesn't talk much.
Yeah, I mean, the in-state corners, like we said, Walton's not going to have to go far, not going to have to deal with any of this Na'eem Offord stuff, I would say, with the 2026 class, if he chooses to do that, because, I mean, got 2 or 3 really good ones here in Ohio. So,
yeah, and sometimes that is if we go back to the top of the show, the Na'eem Offord situation is a problem in that if you want to recruit out-of-state top end talent, like that's part of what you're dealing with. But now like it's seeping into the in-state stuff as well, because kids are interested in experiencing life and getting everything they can get. So those are the guys that visited last weekend. Andrew and I are going to talk a little bit about the couple names that I'm expecting to see and excited to see this weekend at Ohio State when the Buckeyes return to the Horseshoe, 7:30 p.m. on BTN on Saturday night against Western Michigan. We're going to talk about that in just a moment. First, we're going to take a quick break, catch up with Tina Provost of 5-Star Fans. She's going to tell us a little bit about their new initiative and that platform. And then Andrew and I will be right back. Like it or not, folks, college football is changing in a very short amount of time. A lot of things are new. A lot of things are exciting. A lot of things are confusing. One of those things that's particularly confusing and also somewhat unsettling in the way that it's being dealt with around the country is NIL. We talk about it all the time on Talking Stuff. But I figure we have an opportunity because Tina Provost, the CEO of 5-Star Fans, a company folks have probably heard me talk about before, have been online for about a year. They're trying to find a new way to interact with fans and players and not just recruits. So we're going to have Tina come on and share her insight into what is going on in the world of NIL and how maybe you guys can get involved in a new way that makes it feel a little bit less, I don't know, dirty, right? Like sometimes NIL feels dirty. Let's just be honest. But this opportunity, I think, is cool. And so I wanted to make sure that people had an opportunity to look into it, because if you're an Ohio State fan and you wish you could find a way to give back to the guys on the team when someone makes a big play, when Jeremiah Smith scores a touchdown, now there's a way to do it. And I think it's something that people will be interested in. So Tina Provost joins us right now. Tina Provost joins us now, CEO of 5 Star Fans, an Ohio girl, and most importantly, a former Ohio State cheerleader. Tina, why, people have heard me talk about 5 Star Fans on shows in the past. They've seen some retweets of mine on Twitter if they follow me there. What is it for the uninitiated? Why did you start it? And where is it going?
Okay, what is it? It is a platform that gives accessibility to the everyday fan. So especially in the new era with NIL and college athletics, unless you're a donor or a booster, fans, the everyday fan don't have a lot of ways to really connect and contribute to specific athletes or their favorite university. And so we built this because we wanted to offer that same type of connection to fans. So what it does is it allows the everyday fan to help recruit and retain athletes to a roster. On the recruiting side that we launched last summer, fans can crowdsource athletes to come to a particular school. They send them support. And when that athlete finally enrolls in whatever school they choose, all of the money generated from that fan base, from that school, is given and paid out to the athlete in the form of an NIL deal. The retain piece is the really fun stuff that's coming for the first game at Ohio State this weekend. And this is a bananas, totally awesome feature that's never been done in the history of college athletics or sports. Fans are going to be now able to support specific athletes in real time while they're playing on the field. So you'll stream the play-by-play on our platform. And as athletes are making plays, you'll see their name associated with the play, and you can send support immediately to that player to show them that you're a fan and that you want to give them support.
I think one of the interesting things about the NIL world altogether, and it has been just the evolution of technology and people finding different ways to support athletes and finding different ways to be a part of their team. I think sometimes people have felt, like bad when a school's like, hey, give us money. But what makes this concept, I think, different is the opportunity to directly help a student athlete who has helped you, whether it's making your Saturday just a little bit better, or maybe they won you a bet. I don't know. But the point is, like, you can give something back, right?
Yeah, that's right. And I think, when schools are asking for money and the collectives, we're highly supportive of those efforts. And by the way, the collectives a lot of times are run by people who have full-time jobs. So we admire the work that they're doing. But I'll also say that fans want a different level of connection. And when money goes into a pot, they don't always get to track their dollar and see the immediate impact right away. And so that's an element, fans that are excited about what we're doing. And then two, you nailed it, where maybe that player means something different to you. They won you a bet, or you just enjoy watching them. At a deeper level, fans are insanely emotional about their alma mater or about the school that they're associated with. I mean, we get psychologically validated by those athletes on the field because that's part of our school, our history, where we came from. And so if we're able to give even small amounts, we're not looking for donor level checks. We're looking for fans to feel like it's affordable and accessible. If we are able to provide that type of connection, I mean, that is really powerful emotionally for fans across the US.
Yeah, I often tell people that in any other space of life, when we call someone a fanatic, it is generally viewed pretty negatively. But when it comes to sports, like, we're like, hey, yes, I'm a fanatic. And like any other area of life, you're like, actually stay away from that person. He's scary. What has been the biggest lesson in the last year? I mean, how have you guys as a company seen this grow, and what brought you to this idea of turning this away from just the recruiting side of things, which I think there's a lot of guardrails that the NCAA needs to put in place, and we can talk about all that, throughout the rest of time. But what was it that really spurred this idea to go and maybe turn it towards in-game contributions and in-game donations and in-game NIL?
Yeah. Well, it was timely that Coach Gundy from Oklahoma State started that QR code thing about a week and a half ago. And we were like, just wait until he sees what we've got cooking. But what helped us change, and it wasn't a pivot, it was just an addition or a layer on to what we were doing. people always say you can't outcoach recruiting. That's true. But because of what's happening in college athletics, retention has become another issue and another topic of conversation for coaches and administration. And so we knew that there is a large population of humans, 182 million to be exact, that are fans of college athletics that are chomping at the bit to support somehow. But I'll tell you what they don't want is another exclusive newsletter or exclusive content that's not really exclusive. They want to see the impact right away, and they want to feel it, that feedback loop right away, and they want to see it. And so when we came up with the concept a few months ago, and we shared it with some other people. We shared it at that Smart 50 event in Columbus too. People literally gasped that they were able to do that. And we knew that was validation that people are excited to be able to do something like this. And so you can recruit and retain. And now fans get to do both pieces of the value, or where coaches and the administration are having some of the pain points around college sports right now.
Walk us through it. If someone wants to be a part of this, and this is a project and a pilot, I think that you're starting with only a handful of schools in the first part of the season, but Ohio State is one of them. As I mentioned, you're a former Ohio State cheerleader. The Buckeyes mean a lot to you. How do people sign up? What do they do? How does this work?
It's pretty easy. Go to our website, which is 5-starfans.com. You create a quick profile. It takes like 20 seconds or less. And then you can start to navigate. Do you want to look at the recruits for your favorite school, or do you want to look at Playcast, which is the feature with the in-game play-by-play? You click into Playcast and you'll see the upcoming games. As soon as it's live, you'll be able to click into the game and you'll see the feed of every single play. And so even if you wait until the end of a quarter to look at all the plays and who did what, you'll be able to do that. If you wait to the end of the quarter, halftime you want to check in, or even post game, you can still scroll through and see all the plays that athletes were making on the field. And you nailed it. Week 1 through 4, we're doing a handful of games each of those weekends. But then week 5, it'll start to expand into other schools and other games.
Is there a way for the players to track, A, who's donated, B, what plays they're being most compensated for, or anything like that? I mean, how does that work for the player?
Yeah, the player and the fans see all the same thing. It's all super transparent. It's all public. That's another thing we wanted to make sure was transparent. Like I mentioned earlier, some of the conversation from a fan where they stopped giving so much to the collective or to athletics is they didn't know where their dollar was going. They will see it immediately. And same for the athlete. You'll be able to see how much support you've been accumulating throughout a game or throughout time. It'll show up on their player profile. So yeah, it's all there for them. And soon we'll be.
How do the players get the money? What do they have to do to get it? Do they have to say, "Hey, pay me now"? Is it send it to my Cash App? I mean, how does that work?
Yeah, that's a good question, because we talk about this quite a bit too with compliance. Quid pro quo still exists. And so we'll pay the athletes out at the end of every month. The reason we chose every month is so athletes don't have to do that activation every single week while in season. So all of the support that accumulates by the end of the month, they'll do one activation. And it's a simple social media post in partnership with us. And then we've been working with the collectives to say, hey, how do your athletes generally like to get paid out? Or do you already have a process? So we follow the process of the university. And if the player says, I want it directed in ACH, we're going to do that too.
I guess my question is, so let's say pick a random Buckeye. Let's say Jermaine Matthews, a cornerback, makes a play and people want to donate and contribute to Jermaine. How does he know that this exists? Like, are you guys working with the individual programs? How do the players get made aware of this?
It's the collectives right now. And in each of we have 5 core schools that we're targeting right now for week 1 through 4. And we've hired a few of those athletes as influencers to help us push the product out and make their teammates aware. So that's how we're starting. And then we anticipate over the next several weeks that it'll be more broadly known, but that's a big component of our strategy now is awareness.
Yeah. Well, there is a lot going on when it comes to NIL. Tina Provost, former Ohio State cheerleader. Remember, folks, if you're going to support someone, you should probably support someone who's a Buckeye. So go to 5-starfans.com and check it out. It's going to be running, as Tina said, the first 4 weeks are going to be only a select handful of teams. Ohio State will be one, but then anywhere around the country that'll be available. Tina, thank you for joining us and giving us a little insight into the next wave of NIL technology.
Thanks for having me. Good to see you.
Thank you to Tina and for that look at five-star fans and what they're doing this weekend. Something pretty cool if you want to donate to Ohio State football players. That's a pretty cool way to do it. Andrew, Ohio State playing, as I said, BTN Saturday night, 7:30 p.m. It's not going to be a huge list of visitors. We're going to see a lot of locals, a lot of in-state kids, a lot of younger kids, 26s, 27s, in some cases 28s. I would assume the normal crowd of Ohio State commitments like Tavian St. Clair and Eli Lee, et cetera, will be there. I don't mean to gloss over those guys, but we talk about them all the time, and they're going to be at everything. So it's not a big deal to bring them up. So I don't even have them on the list. But one thing that I think will be interesting, he's not on this list, is Jordan Thomas, who is a defensive back from Bergen Catholic in New Jersey, Quincy Porter's teammate. Those guys are playing at Massillon, Washington on Friday night. I'm going to be there watching that game. There was a discussion initially about Quincy and the Bergen Catholic guys visiting Ohio State for this game on Saturday night. And now it seems like at least Jordan Thomas is going to Michigan on Saturday to visit there, which it's hard to blame him. If you can go see Michigan and Texas play, it's probably a better game to go watch. I haven't heard if that's like a team thing. So if it is a team thing, then there's at least an outside chance we could see Quincy Porter at Michigan this weekend. I would imagine that there's some arrangement that will get him to Columbus instead. So I don't have him on this list, but I wouldn't be surprised if he shows up. But if he shows up at Michigan, that will probably end up like being a thing on Sunday. But I wouldn't make it a thing because I think if he does go there, it's going to be with his team. Does that make sense? Am I just causing unnecessary worry?
No, you're not, because if he is there, the Michigan media is going to, really blow that one out of proportion. So just brace yourselves if that does happen.
Yeah, but again, if he's there, it's going to be as a full team thing as they're traveling from Ohio. Again, the plan was initially to go to Columbus, but those guys will get back into town later in the year. So I don't know if Quincy will end up at Ohio State, or maybe he'll end up at Michigan with teammates on Saturday, but just keep an eye on that. Mac Sutter, tight end from Illinois, is visiting this weekend. He told me that Keenan Bailey has basically been like a big brother to him. And as they've grown their relationship, he camped this summer, was really impressive. He's the number 4 ranked tight end in the country, according to Rivals.com, and a player that I think, could be creeping towards the top of the list as far as Ohio State's tight end targets in the class of 2026, which is a wide net right now and is going to continue to be a wide net, especially as they continue to evaluate Braden Fogel, the in-state tight end from Lexington. Fogel was at the Georgia-Clemson game last weekend, and Sutter was at the the Auburn game. So those kids are getting around the country, and tight ends are becoming a pretty high priority asset for these programs, especially Georgia, who has used theirs better than pretty much anybody in the last 5 years. Fogel has an offer, as I said last week, like he had Georgia gloves and a Georgia back plate sticker on. And then he went back to Georgia after being there a month and a half ago. So might be something to watch there. I don't know if they'd take him or not, but it kind of feels like they are pushing, which is interesting. Again, this weekend is not going to be a list of just a who's who, because there are big games coming, like the Iowa game and Nebraska, the homecoming game. Those games are going to be much more well attended by Ohio State's top targets. But I think it's important to mention these 2 offensive linemen coming to town. Reed Gherkin, a 2027 from Perrysburg, Ohio, just outside of Toledo, 6'5", 280 pound sophomore. He has offers from 5 MAC schools already. Been to Tennessee twice. He's going back to Tennessee next weekend. Did camp with the Buckeyes this summer. They really liked what they saw. I'm not going to say that I'm expecting him to be offered this weekend, but I would not be shocked if both Reed Gherkin and Mason Wilt, the other offensive lineman on this list from St. Clairsville down near the West Virginia border, ends up getting an offer this weekend as well, because those two, both 6'5", 285, 290 pound kids, both camped, both very well put together for sophomores. Ohio State, this is even later in their cycle than when the Buckeyes offered Max Riley. So I think you could see them try to get a head start on some of these in-state offensive linemen in order to avoid the long-term problems that we've had.
St. Clairsville. That was the home of the Ferns brothers, wasn't it?
The Ferns brothers, also Avery Henry, who retired from Ohio State, he had cancer. So it's a winning program. It's one that everyone knows very well about in the state of Ohio. I think it's just going to be interesting to see how Ohio State attacks offensive line recruiting in the years to come. It has been a while since they offered Sam Greer. It's been a while since they've offered Will Conroy and Max Riley. They've offered nobody else in the state in that class of 2026, despite the fact that Adam Guthrie's out there, despite the fact that there are other really good developing offensive linemen in the state of Ohio. I think that I could be convinced that Gherkin and Wilt will both be offered this weekend, but we'll see. But either way, definitely two names to know as we start looking ahead to 2027, which is crazy to me to say. Like, I cannot believe we're talking about 2027 recruits. But
yeah, I mean, you've got a 2028 name right there too. I mean, we're getting old, so
yeah, we are old. What are your questions?
Well, we've spent the last couple of weeks talking about the flip target. I mean, when I say that, I don't mean flip targets. I mean Ohio State commitments that are at least worth watching. And we spent obviously a ton of time earlier talking about Na'eem Offord in Auburn and Oregon and Alabama, mostly Auburn. The other names that we've talked about primarily are two Florida players, Jarquez Carter and TJ Alford. Mm-hmm. And I think I'm not too worried about Carter just because I saw some tweets about his comments after Miami killed Florida. You know, the game made him even more sure on his decision to commit to Ohio State, whatever. And I think when you asked me which of the names I was most concerned about, like a week or two ago, I told you that Alford was the one that I was concerned about.
Yeah.
Well, now Florida State looks terrible. They're 0-2. I guess just from your perspective, do you think that should make people feel better, or do you think it's just two games and it's not really going to matter until December when he finalizes things?
No, I mean, I think Miami's always been the bigger concern for Alford anyway. I know that, there has been a lot of Florida State buzz, but if Miami continues to look the way they looked against Florida, and so I'm going to try to take that with a grain of salt because they put it on a really bad Florida team, which, as you said, like Jarquez Carter, quotes after that game were like, okay, well, I do not want to go there, which is, probably smart because there's at least a pretty good chance, I think, that Billy Napier will be looking for a job by the end of this season. We'll see, though. They are starting DJ Lagway this weekend. We'll see if that can quickly right the ship. No, I mean, the Alford thing is interesting because, again, like Na'eem Offord and his family, like, he does and says everything that you want him to do and say. He's very involved with other recruits. He's very active in conversation and helping recruit other players. So, TJ has told me he plans on being at Ohio State twice, maybe 3 times this season. As long as that happens, I'm not worried. If it doesn't happen, and we've talked about this before, but like the closer it gets to signing day, the harder it is for kids who are far away from Ohio State to feel like they're ready to make that move. So the more opportunity he gets to be on campus, the better. That's why you have to be thrilled, like that Devin Sanchez and his family are making the trip 3 separate times. They're going to be here for the Marshall game. They're going to come back for the Nebraska game. Then they're going to come for the Michigan game. Like that they're so locked in and dialed in that you don't worry about that at all. And you'd certainly like to see that out of the other guys. But Alford has said all those things. And I do think that the interesting part of the Miami conversation is, like USC, like they've been sort of waiting for a coach to be able to come in there and reclaim their area, reclaim their throne. If you look, we're still looking at the Western Michigan unofficial visitors, but Neiman Lawrence, who's a 2028 quarterback from Miami, he visited Ohio State over the summer, camped, earned an offer. So again, that's a kid earning an offer before his freshman year of high school. He'll be back in town this weekend. And so the Buckeyes are not going to waste time like pushing there. So they're going to try to make sure that they get a real head start and let kids know that, hey, it doesn't matter if Miami's back or not. Like Ohio State is still the move for you, especially if you're a quarterback. So which is interesting because Cam Ward played pretty well for Miami in week 1. So I don't know exactly what to make of the Alford interest in other schools at this point, because I don't personally think that he has that much interest in other schools. That's just my read on it. I think he's just always been doing his homework and making sure that if something went haywire, he had an opportunity to go somewhere else. And again, these schools who are playing the game of we're going to try to flip you and we're going to do it in whatever way we can, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. These schools are smart enough to find susceptible people in the circle of trust for these kids and find a way to manipulate them and use them. So as long as Ohio State is able to continue to keep the relationship with TJ at the forefront, and James Laurinaitis has done a great job with that. We saw Riley Pettijohn show up at the game last week. Like there's less worry from Ohio State than there is from the fans. I assure you when it comes to that stuff.
No, that's good to hear. That's promising. I know I kind of jumped ahead with our questions a bit, but I do have one more. So you've kind of scratched the Turbo Rogers stuff, at least to a degree. And it sounded more and more like Ohio State will take the 2 backs they've got now, Bo Jackson and Isaiah West, and then maybe add a guy from the portal, which I feel like they absolutely have to do, assuming the 2 they've got now starting end up going pro. Who are just give me 2 names, 2026 running backs. I feel like I should know, but I was trying to think about it earlier. Who are a couple of big ones to watch in 2026 at running back? And not that anything's happening soon, but I was drawing a blank earlier when I was trying to think of who we've been talking about, who we're looking at.
Obviously, I mean, number 1 in the country and most, or at least on Rivals.com, is Savion Hyder from Woodbury Forest, Virginia. I expect he's told me he's going to visit Ohio State again. He's an interesting character in that Savion was coming to visit Ohio State at the end of March, and then Tony Alford left Ohio State, and so the visit got canceled. It never got rescheduled, but he said he wants to visit. That's definitely one to watch. I am a huge fan of Jonathan Hatton at Steele High School in Cibolo, Texas. He's committed to Oklahoma. But I think that if they've really pushed there, he's a guy that they could make some hay with. Javion Mallory in West Boca Raton, Florida. He's a guy that the Buckeyes have done a nice job with. Tony Alford was very high on him. I'm not sure if we've seen the connection yet between Carlos Lachlan and Mallory. Also, Javion Osborne in Texas, a big one. Deshaun Rito in Oaks Christian out in California. He's one to watch for sure. And Carson Baker down in Georgia is another one who is a 3-star, but has an Ohio State offer, along with Rayson Guillory in Aledo, Texas. Guillory was a former Texas commit who reopened his recruitment a few weeks ago, and he's interested in getting up to visit. So it just feels like the entire 26 class right now is in wait and see mode. And I don't know if it's because the Buckeyes have changed their approach all that much. But I think maybe it is. We're heading into 3 months until signing day, and you have the number 1 class in the country. You have 26 guys committed. You're trying to hold on to them. You're trying to figure out exactly how many guys on your current roster are going to be off to the NFL. That's a big question, even with the Na'eem Offord thing, because Davis and Igbinosun's decision, I think, plays a major role in exactly what Ohio State feels like they have to do when it comes to Na'eem Offord. So there's a lot of those discussions. And I wonder if, Andrew, we're heading into this era where the roster really can't be viewed from a 4-year window. It's 1 year at a time. So why spend so much time getting ahead on recruiting or getting offers out super early? And I think it's maybe going to be one of the unintended consequences of the transfer portal era, is that we might see the bigger programs start to reel back in the recruiting calendar and not let it get so far ahead like it was in the last couple of years.
When you were just going down that list of running backs, did you mention that Alston kid from Paynesville?
I didn't, because he doesn't have an offer. And that's, again, Ohio State has offered 9 kids in the state of Ohio. They've seen Sean a handful of times. I think he's pretty good, but they haven't offered. So that's one to watch, maybe along with Braden Fogel. over these first couple weeks of the high school football season to see if that goes out. And if it doesn't go out during this season, then I would think that that's pretty telling that Ohio State just doesn't see it. So,
yeah, he's actually the reason I asked about that.
And he did camp, so like they had a good look at him up close.
That was my next question, because I saw he has like an Auburn offer. I think he's a top 10 running back in the country, but I mean, it's still early, and maybe they just have other guys they like better. I guess, who knows?
That's the way it is.
Last thing, not recruiting related. What's your prediction for Texas, Michigan?
I see this. I saw the line is what? Michigan plus 7.5.
6.5 or 7.5. I think it's fluctuated, but yes, they're an underdog at home.
I really like Michigan's defense. I think it's like exceptional still. I think Texas certainly has the more talented offense, but I don't see them getting like into the 30s or 40s. So I think Texas 24-16 type game, 24-17. I think Texas will win, but I think it's going to be closer than people will anticipate. Michigan's physicality, if you're not used to it, and I know Texas plays good competition, but if you're not used to Michigan's front seven, especially, I think that they can cause some real havoc. But I think Texas will win because I think Quinn Ewers is better than whoever Michigan is running out at quarterback from snap to snap. So, and I just from a skill position standpoint, the Longhorns have a couple guys that are game breakers, and if Donovan Edwards does not magically turn into 2022 Ohio State Donovan Edwards or 2023 national championship game against Washington Donovan Edwards, I don't think Michigan has the home run hitters to play that game with Texas. So, what's yours?
No, I think Texas will win. I was going to say like by 10 or so. I don't think they're going to be able to run the ball against Michigan. I think I didn't think Will Johnson played that well last week, besides the one pick six, which was awesome. But I watched parts of the game and he didn't look like an All-American corner to me. But that pick I
saw people saying that on Twitter. I was driving home when that game was on, so I didn't get a chance to watch any of it. But I certainly saw the Twitter reports, and not just from people who root for or cover Ohio State. I saw it from national people who said it wasn't his best game. So maybe a bounce back. I mean, it's hard to say like, oh, it wasn't his best game. He had a game ceiling 90-yard pick six where he looked like he was shot out of a freaking cannon, and looked pretty special on that play. But it's hard, man. College football's hard. Fresno State's a well-coached team. We'll see if Texas comes to town ready to play, but Michigan's going to throw some punches early. And what I like about Michigan from an offensive standpoint is that I know Sharon Moore is willing to be creative and do trick plays and try to find some advantages. So if Texas's defense isn't disciplined, they could get beat. That's the way I think Michigan can give up a long touchdown or two. Or I'm sorry, Texas can give up a long touchdown or two to Michigan is through some trickeration. But
yeah, I could see that. This isn't a Michigan show, though. I don't want to bore people with that. Do you think Jeremiah Smith, first 100-yard game of his career this weekend?
Yeah, I'm starting to wonder if he's just going to score 2 touchdowns every week, and I believe he could. But I'd think 100 yards and 2 scores is probably a good guess for Jeremiah. He's really good. And again, as I said at the beginning of the show, talking about Na'eem Offord, there are always discussions outside of the norm, outside of the realm of normalcy. And the conversations about NIL with Na'eem Offord and what's worth it and how can you make these decisions based on what else you have on the roster. There are occasionally players like Jeremiah Smith who are like, oh, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. There is no discussion when it comes to him. And he proved it in game 1, and he's going to prove it his entire career. And Ohio State's going to have to renegotiate every year. Cool, college football. Good job. Andrew Ellis, I'm Jeremy Birmingham. This has been Talking Stuff. We really do appreciate you watching, everyone. It is true that you have a lot of options out there, and it's truly a blessing that you keep coming back to the podcast. So thanks for watching, everyone. We'll see you next week. Have a good one.